And with that, welcome to the second part of a Halloween special. In other words, Love My Shadows. It's TsukiYamaKageHina special. And, well, as announced, it will get a little bit more angsty in this part. A lot more angsty. A little content warning for the mention of blood and a little bit of gore at this part. But it won't get exactly spooky or anything, so if you have problems with things like jump scares, don't worry, not in this video. And now I hope you enjoy. 3 weeks into their newfound relationship, and they already had their first real fight, as well as the reconciliation following very quickly after. The relationship was filled with ups and downs in a short amount of time, yet always returning to a reassuring and steady middle ground. A foundation to build on. They loved each other, and even through their fights, never denied that. Yamaguchi had to admit that as funny as it could be, he valued the reassurance above all else when they yelled at each other, still using their pet names from "You can be such a dumbass, darling," to "If I'm annoying you so much, honey, why don't you just break up with me?" What was very much serious at the moment, at times even passive-aggressive, particularly when it came to Tsukishima, always reminded him that they loved each other despite whatever quarrels stood between them. 3 weeks, and with every day the burden on his shoulders seemed to gain weight. He shied away from their touches and cuddles whenever he allowed himself to get too comfortable. One time, he almost spread his wing in his sleep, wrapping them around Hinata in a loving gesture of protection and reassurance. They had fallen asleep on his bed after studying together, though they cuddled more than they studied. Spreading his wings happened naturally, on instinct. If he hadn't caught a glimpse of his reflection in the mirror, if Shoyo had woken up a little earlier. Dread settled in his stomach the more he thought about it. With time, they get more comfortable and confident in their touches and displays of affection. Everyone but Yamaguchi slowly returned to making out as they would sometimes before they get together, when drunk for the most part. They reassured him that they would go at his pace. But the thing was, he wanted this. All of this. It became just increasingly harder to control his transformation once his blood started to boil and his skin burned under their touch. All the sensations seemed to drown him, and he gasped for air to stay in control of his very own nature. His instincts yearned for them to get closer. The urge to cuddle with them, wrap them tightly in his arms to keep them safe and be kept safe by them was overwhelming. Adding to this kind of nesting instinct, a base instinct to deepen the bonds within a hive, was that he slowly but surely saw them as potential mates. It amplified his desire to be with them and openly display his affections. Demon courting consisted of a lot of cuddles, caring gestures, joint hands and midnight flights, as well as courting gifts, parts of which definitely were off limits due to the simple fact that they were impossible. But Yamaguchi still caught himself placing little gifts around the flat for them, and once almost brought a mouse home from one of the nights he snuck out. He felt like a cat and just wanted to vanish from embarrassment. The more time passed, the more demon behavior found its way into their daily lives as he subconsciously scented their clothes, nuzzled his nose in their hair and neck whenever they cuddled, and was overall a lot more physically affectionate. He once even purred when Kageyama started to play with his hair after he let himself fall onto his lap, exhausted from school. The setter didn't even seem to notice at first until Yamaguchi clasped his hands over his mouth in shock and his face got beet red. No matter how much he tried to suppress what he was, it was impossible. He felt too comfortable, too safe with them. With a sigh, he climbed onto the windowsill, embracing the cold breeze as he opened it wide. His gaze wandered back to his sleeping boyfriends, and a soft smile tucked his lip upwards. He whispered, "Good night," before jumping off the ledge, spreading his wings and allowing the wind to get caught underneath. Within seconds, he covered the distance to the low-hanging ceiling of clouds, getting lost in the wet fog, protected from nosy eyes. It was as if he could finally breathe more freely again, as if for the first time in days he could truly stretch his tired limbs and make use of his muscles. It was as if he had been forced to lay still the whole time and was finally allowed to move again. The wind on his skin and the soft pearls of water catching on his wings was incredible. He dived through the thick clouds just for the cold to remind him that he was alive. Each drop hitting his face was a reminder that he lived, that he was free. His tail caught onto the branch of a tree as soon as he reached the edge of the woods that were his hunting grounds. It ached and cracked a little under his weight as he landed on top of it softly, his yellow eyes piercing through the dark shadows. He blinked a couple of times, his eyes changing until the darkness was replaced by spots of yellow and red, the body heat from potential prey. His smile exposed sharp fangs as he set out for his first target. It didn't take long and he held a rabbit between his teeth, snapping its neck quickly so that it wouldn't suffer unnecessarily. In a ritual of gratitude for its sacrifice and to return its soul to the forest, he carefully drained its blood, letting it soak the ground. For demons, blood was very valuable. By drinking each other's, they were able to share strength and use it for healing. It led to the belief that one's blood was bounding the soul to the body. Leaving the blood of a prey at the place of death was a matter of respect for its sacrifice. He completed the ritual with the utmost care before getting up and setting off to... What in hell am I thinking? He was this close to bringing the rabbit home as a gift for his partners. Again, the demon hid his face in his hands in a desperate attempt to hide from the world. This was hopeless. He cried out as his face flushed red. He couldn't go on like this. If he... All his thoughts were wiped blank at once, as a piercing pain flooded his system. Suddenly he couldn't breathe anymore, couldn't feel or see anything anymore but the blinding pain. White filled his vision as he started coughing. Every time his body shook, the pain intensified. His senses returned to him at once, distorted and amplified. A sticky, dark red liquor gushed from the wound in his chest. With every cough, more soaked his clothes until he could taste it, realizing with horror that the streams of red were falling from his lips. He couldn't breathe. He couldn't move. He couldn't heal. A long, thin piece of wood had penetrated his chest. An arrow expertly shot between his ribs, tearing his lungs and skin and remaining stuck, keeping him from healing. His eyes widened in shock. Terrified, he searched the dark for the source. He heard the horrid sound of another arrow slicing through the air just in time to avoid the worst. It grazed over his forehead as he flinched away, cutting it open and blinding him as rivers of red took his vision. Everything was red and filled with pain. Every breath, every sound, every second. He had to do something. Move! Blindly he spread his wings and with all the strength he had left pushed himself off the ground. More arrows cut the air around him but missed his vital parts. Some still sliced the skin, but none pierced his flesh like the one in his chest. With every meter he won in height, fewer and fewer reached him as he searched for cover in the clouds again. He could still hear angry voices shouting behind him. "I told you to go for the wings! How many times do I—" It was quickly replaced by an increasingly louder static in his ears as he threatened to lose consciousness. It was all too much. The pain spread further and burned increasingly hotter with every breath. Blood drowned out the oxygen and he still couldn't see a thing. He blindly followed his instincts, navigating through the fog on what he hoped was a familiar road. He was already prepared to apologize profusely to his parents for putting everyone in danger when he realized with horror that he had found his way home. But not the home he thought. With his last strength, he held onto the windowsill, a window he had opened merely a few hours prior. Red dripped everywhere as he forced his body to tip over into their living room, where the others were still fast asleep. It looked also peaceful. Hinata lay sprawled out between the other two, taking up the most space, while Tsuki had an arm protectively around them, and Kageyama snuggled up to the ginger's side. It was hard to believe that not even a night ago he had been part of that, careless and safe. His only worry whether anyone had noticed that he was a bit too touchy lately, asking for too many cuddles and sleepovers like this. Well, now he felt like he was dying. Tears burned their tracks on his face as he forced himself to get up and drag his body into his own room. He couldn't let them know. He couldn't let them see him like this. Maybe some part of his brain was aware that it was a futile attempt, that he wouldn't be able to hide in his room anyway, and that as soon as they would wake up and see the blood, it was over anyway, that there was nothing to be saved anymore. But he still proceeded. His vision darkened at the seams. The comforting smell of home didn't reach him and was drowned out by the heavy stench of iron and copper. Red was all he could see. Blood was all he could taste. He had barely made a step into the room as he collapsed. He could feel his body trying to heal itself, but the arrow blocked it. His hands were trembling as he tried to reach for the thin but deadly projectile, but failed to grasp it. With every drop of blood falling from his wounds, his strength seemed to drain further. Yet the sweet relief of unconsciousness never came. The pain kept him barely at the surface, sinking under time and time again, yet never enough to take him completely. Demon bodies were sturdy, and as long as the vicious wood hadn't been coated in poison, this could go on for hours, until his body finally gave out, or the arrow was removed. This was his first flight, and it seemed like he would follow the example of many. Too weak to defend himself, too naive to be cautious, too distracted to be vigilant. He tried mumbling an apology to his parents for taking their only child, for not returning as he promised, but out came only more red as his eyes rolled back and his eyelids shut close. Not to sleep, but to remain in this tortured state until finally the night would have mercy on him and take him back. Hinata was the first to wake up. He stretched, hitting the other two accidentally in his sleep-drunken state, which was answered with a groan from both of them. Confused, he looked around, realizing that one of them was missing. Jens? He rubbed his eyes and yawned. Suddenly, something caught his attention. Red marks were scattered all over the windowsill. He stopped as he stepped closer to investigate. The marks consisted of a dried, dark red liquid and stains that looked like smudged handprints. The nauseating stench of stale blood filled the air, and he could feel his stomach turning and his eyes starting to sting. If this is supposed to be a prank, it's not funny. He hesitantly stepped to the window and looked down, afraid of what he might find and half relieved when there was no sight of a body on the concrete beneath. Who did this? Where's Yamaguchi? This isn't funny! Where is he? What are you talking about, Bouquet? Kageyama threw a scorching glare at him, only stopped by the tears falling from the dough-brown eyes. Tsukishima woke up as well, immediately picking up on Hinata's distress. Before the soothing words and questions could leave his lips, he saw the marks as well and froze. His eyes widened. Where's Tadashi? He gulped, looking around frantically. Where is he? The more he did, the more he saw small puddles of red everywhere and bloody handprints all over the furniture. It looked like someone had been murdered in here. Cold shivers ran down Tsukishima's spine as images of the worst-case scenario stuck their vicious claws into his consciousness. From the corner of his eye, he could see Kageyama helplessly wrapping his arm around Hinata. He looked like he was at the brim of a panic attack, in a futile attempt to console him. The time it took to take everything in felt too long. It took too long for the rational thinking to return, for the vicious sense of urgency to kick in. Hinata was the first one to move, the others following shortly behind. Their legs carried them automatically to Yamaguchi's room in a desperate attempt to find him. They noticed with horror that the blood trace led the same way. The room swayed before his eyes as he took in the sight. Nausea flooding his system, and his muscles were suddenly locked in place. There before them lay their boyfriend, surrounded by a large puddle of blood, dripping both from a wound in his chest where an arrow had pierced the flesh, and his mouth. Tadashi! Hinata rushed to his side, panic seeping into his voice, and he was shaken violently. What happened? Are you... Wake up! Tadashi, wake up! You have to wake up! I can't... His breathing was frantic, and Tsukishima felt barely any better. He couldn't... He had to do something. Tadashi couldn't be... He was always there. He couldn't be... gone. His world seemed to shatter before his eyes. Yamaguchi looked lifeless. Nobody could survive such a bloodlust. Nobody... Hinata broke down, pulling Tadashi's head to his chest as he cried into his hair, mumbling pleas for him to wake up, over and over again. But the other didn't move. The streams of blood had turned into small rivers, still pouring from the wound, slow and steady. Every drop of red seemed to wash the colors around it away, as if the world had suddenly turned black and white, with the vicious red being the only exception. Kageyama next time stepped into the room, his hand ever leaving the wall to steady himself, in vain as his legs suddenly gave out on him. His eyes widened in horror and tears fell freely from his face to the ground. Please wake up, yeah. Please. I do everything. Please. Please. Tsukishima seemed to sink deeper and deeper. Everything was suddenly far, far away. He didn't even recognize himself. He was so far gone, he almost missed the small twitch of the wings attached to his boyfriend's back. Yams. There it was. His chest moved ever so slightly. Tadashi, we are here. Please. He reached out for him. The first thing Yamaguchi noticed was the very familiar scent of sunflowers and light. It was so much more intense now, almost enough to drown out the blood. He heard cries and pleas, felt pain all over his body and overwhelming nausea. He had felt it the whole time, constantly aware yet unable to process the information. It took him forever to recognize the change. Sunflowers. The scent was lovely. He believed his lips pulled up into a smile, but he wasn't sure. He tried moving closer to the source of the scent, but couldn't tell if his muscles followed his order. Yams, please. He recognized that voice. It matched the scent. Immediately another wave of comfort washed over him and a purr of content built up in his throat. It took him even longer to realize how distraught the voice sounded, like he was in pain. And even longer for worry to bloom and finally connect a name to the sensations, the person. Sho. He forced his eyes open. Immediately more information flooded his brain. Shoyo's lips moved, but he couldn't hear him. His breathing was shallow and it hurt. A new wave of blood found its way into his mouth, but he had not the energy to cough or vomit. The red simply dripped from his lips onto Hinata's hands and lap. In his peripheral vision, he could see movement, a new voice joining the other. Kate. Tadashi, hold on. Kate. It hurts. It hurt for so long. He didn't even know how much time had passed. His whole existence had consisted of nothing but pain. It hurts. The words felt like lead in his mouth, heavy and tenacious. We need to bring him to a hospital. We can't. But look at him. Warm drops fell onto his face. We have to. He needs a doctor. I know. Their voices were shaking with fear and pain. The air. Pull the air. No, we can't. Wait! Suddenly the pain intensified tenfold, and he screamed as the wooden projectile was torn from his chest. And then everything just felt better. He could hear them getting hectic as the rivers of blood thickened, and he wished he could tell them that it was okay. Everything was okay. It would be okay now. He could finally sleep. He felt his eyes shutting close. Hinata's cries he should stay awake, the last thing he could hear. Well, for some reason I feel like this is gonna be the day I get murdered by my community. Hey! I hope you liked it. Thank you all for watching to the end. Third part is coming tomorrow. I hope I can make up for this. Oh damn. I apologize. I sincerely apologize for this part. I really do. But also, like, many people were asking for angst, so it's not all my fault. Have a good day. I love you all. Goodbye.